today as Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Let me read you this story. I knew you were interested in tax collectors. And it's like, so the story goes like this. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. So, he's a rock star now, and this is his journey to Jerusalem. He's eventually going to get to Jerusalem on this thing. It's actually the next place he goes. So, the crowds are building. It's part of the story. There was a man named Zacchaeus. He was one of the most influential Jews in the Roman tax collecting business. And he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowds. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore or fig tree, in other books, beside the road so he could watch from there. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name, Zacchaeus. And he said, "Quick, come down, for I must be a guest at your home today." That's pretty gutsy, isn't it, right? Anyway. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in a great excitement and joy. But the crowds were displeased. "He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner," they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "I will give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord, and I will overcharge nobody. If I give that, I will give them 4 times as much." And Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a son of Abraham. And I, the Son of Man, have come to seek and save those who were lost." Well, I think in traditional way of thinking about this, you would say that Zacchaeus was a sinner. Jesus comes along, and now he's saved, right? And that was a good story about being saved by Jesus. And it has great merit, that idea that essentially that once at one time we take advantage of other people because we're a little empty inside, essentially, right? That we think money and stuff will get us more satisfaction, and we realize that quite quickly that a little bit doesn't quite do it, so we do it more, and eventually we become pretty addicted to this idea that more stuff might do us better. And that then becomes a substitute for a deeper spiritual sense of self, a more whole sense of self. And therefore we are lost in that sense of getting to try to fill something that's already there until something comes along and wakes us up that we were never in lack in the first place for the most essential things of our life. This, aside from the things of the body, the things of the spirit have always been with us. They have always been there, and they will always be there because they come with the package of being a human being. And we can be lost to that so thoroughly that we have forgotten completely that there is another way. And so once we turn, it can feel like we were saved from an endless struggle on things that don't quite satisfy, in search of something that actually does sort of satisfy us more deeply. This is the idea of being saved in a general sense. That we are really not so much plucked from darkness, but remember to turn the light on to ourselves. We remember who we really are. This is the path of spiritual awakening, is to come to identify yourself differently than you had before. Because once we are too addicted to this way of thinking, our identity becomes that. What do? Becomes who you say you are. And in this guy's case, he was a tax collector. Now, the Jews didn't like tax collectors, and probably throughout the whole Roman Empire, they didn't like tax collectors. except in Rome, because in Rome they got the benefit of the taxes they took from everybody else. And it was a uphill, the money flowed uphill in that system. And to make it work, what the Romans would do is get people in the local community to do the tax collecting. And if they did it, the local people hated them twice as much because they were their kinfolk. They were in the same tribe as they were, and yet they were taking from them and giving to Rome. So they were really the quislings. Nobody liked them, right? They were people were disgusted with them. And they also had the sneaky little habit of charging you more than you actually were charged. And because they had the Romans, the muscle behind them, they could make you do, and you could not resist. And so they had a built-in system that money flowed uphill. It flowed from little tax collectors to big tax collectors. And then from the big tax collectors to the Romans. It's a good system. Sounds very Godfather-ish, doesn't it? Well, that's the truth. It was. The whole world, in the Roman world, was Godfather-ish. It was tough. If you were poor, you were getting beat up. It paid to be on top. It paid to be on top so much. Those who were on top had very little interest in helping those who were underneath. And so in that world, it was the poor who supported the rich. There was no thought of trickle-down economics there, I can tell you that. This was about the money flowing uphill. And so the Jews would use tax collectors as another word for the worst thing they could think of in humanity. They were the scum of the earth as far as most people concerned, even though they were wealthy. And so Zacchaeus, being the chief among the tax collectors, was the worst of the worst. Bad guy. Bad guy. Everybody knew it. And here is this little man, and apparently he was little, and climbs a tree. Now, interestingly, in some texts it says he climbs a sycamore tree. Now, a sycamore tree here is not the same sycamore they're talking about there. The sycamore they have in the Middle East is really more like a fig tree. It puts out fruit. And it was so important that King David actually put a minister in charge of these trees, these sycamore fig trees, because it fed the people. So he climbs this tree, and it's shaped not quite like our sycamore trees. The pictures I've seen, it looks a little easier to climb than the ones I've seen, sycamores here. He gets up there, and Jesus can see him, and Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come down, I want to eat at your home. Now, he didn't say at your house, he said at your home, so that's kind of interesting in and of itself, isn't it? Eat at your home, which means I'm going to penetrate more than your physical exterior. I'm coming in to your heart. Close. I'm coming in close. And hospitality, as you may or may not know, in the Jewish world was a commandment that you were to be hospitable to foreigners, strangers, etc. Now, I'm not sure everybody followed that, but that's came down from the time when Abraham receives foreigners, and they happen to be an emissary of God, and it begins it's the beginning of him becoming notorious, or no, that's not the right word, famous for being the father of three religions, because he took in these strangers who were messengers of the divine. This becomes codified in the Jewish world that that's the way you're supposed to be, but it also brings great honor upon you if you can get the biggest gun in town to come eat at your house, right? So if Jesus, who's now got a crowd that's just wanting to see him, lining so he can't even see them, that he has to climb a tree, he's done really well. And so as Jesus penetrates into his innermost self, he begins he has an outward transformation as well. Because now his honor is coming not from money, but from the inner self. Jesus in this story could be a person, or as most things in the Bible can be translated as the Christ's presence as well. Most places Jesus can be translated as your Christ's presence. And so when the Christ presence moves into the center part of your being, into your home, becomes your home base, then not only will you begin to feel differently, but perhaps your what is valuable to you, what brings you glory, what brings you good, will be that presence as well. I got a note from Anna Quintana. Remember her? Somewhat. I could just barely remember who she is. Anna, somebody wrote her a note and said, Anna, I think you're on a very fast spiritual development. Your life is changing very quickly, and you're willing to follow that path no matter where it leads you. And because of that, I think you're going to move very quickly, and you're an inspiration to us because now you're on that path. Well, if you take Anna, she was not a tax collector, but for 23 years she ran her family business. And she did everything she could to make her business profitable, the family successful, etc., until she could not do it anymore. Until she was just topped out with being in charge of business and numbers. And so she left and became a minister. And she has not pursued with this. If you know Anna, she's always pursuing the buck. She's always smart about money, right? Do you know what I mean? But where she is going where her heart, where her soul tells her to go. And she's following that one presence wherever it takes her. And you know that's why she's not here. It took her away. So the change of priorities happens when we begin to listen to the still small voice instead of the clanging of the outer world that tells us what we need. And if you have anything that is connected to the outer world, you have an advertisement on it telling you what it is you need. And most of us have most everything we really need. Most of us are not desperate for stuff. We're desperate for meaning. We're desperate for purpose, connection. And one of the things about connection that we're desperate for is that in the last few years, as you know, we have been told repeatedly that connection may kill you. And so we're working against that repeated thought. The repetition of that has been quite interesting. I think it's been subtle and deep. And we are not as habituated to coming together for the nourishment of community as we used to be. And so we have become more isolated. And the number of people who have contemplated suicide, and the number of people who have opioid addictions, and the number of people who are depressed or anxious has gotten larger. Part of the cure is coming together. And so this is one long pitch for the party we're going to have. No, it's not. This expansion of your community is fundamental to mental health, in my opinion. And this story about Zacchaeus is another example of that, where those who have been kicked out of their society because the society judged them, they did not feel they belong, the Christ's presence is calling them home. Come be part of the community. Or as Jesus says, this man is a son of Abraham. If that wasn't enough to tell you, be kind to strangers and the different. Be kind to strangers and the different, because they are our tribe. Those people who don't look like us, those people who don't sound like us, who don't have as much money or have more money, don't let that keep you from inviting them into your life as well. So Zacchaeus, the great sinner, represents all of us who are in the business of outer world orientation. And the Christ presence, exemplified by Jesus, is calling us back inward to come home. So I've been teaching a class in the last 3 weeks about prayer and meditation according to Unity's style of doing that. And one of the things, it's 5 steps that is part of the class, is the 5-step prayer method. But we started off with this idea that there's only one presence and one power. And I gotta say, I must be off my game because I had pushback on that. Not hard, but this idea that you and that, which is considered God by many names, that the two of us are not, that we are one. And the second principle that cascades out of that is that if God is everything and there's only one presence and one power, then you must be part of it. And if you are part of it and everyone else is part of it, then how is it that we should be so judgmental about the other parts of ourselves? How is it the hand on this side would say to the hand on that side, you're wrong. You're on the left. No, I'm on the right. I must be right. It is as ridiculous as anything. And this judgmental pattern that we have of separating ourselves has been shown to be, at its ultimate, wildly, painfully destructive. This is the week in which we remember the Holocaust, and which that phrase, oh, they are like tax collectors, they're usurers, right? The Jews were usurers because they were willing to do the banking that Christians were forbidden to do, and so they got a bad rap for that. But the idea that they are other was, whenever that was spawned, grew to its zenith with the Nazis, and 6 million die. You take it to the extreme, and is the world better or worse? Worse. You take it the other way to the extreme, is it better or worse that all are considered brothers and sisters? Better. Sometimes it's hard to know in the middle. Or as they say in the Bible, someone sows bad seeds in your garden. Just wait till it grows up, you'll know the fruit of it. The fruit of prejudice and distancing ourselves from each other because we assume they are that way. When it grows up, death. You may not notice it when it's young, but when it gets full grown, it's horror. And by the other side, if we live by the idea that all are included, all belong, all are sons of Abraham, what is the outcome? The awakening. So this story and all that goes with it is essentially a reminder that you belong, that you are a Christ too, that you have inside you the very essence that was also inside Jesus. And not only that, everybody else does as well. And though the outer may look unacceptable, that core which connects us is the core that makes us at one with the big one and the small one, the weak and the strong, the rich and the poor. They are our brothers and sisters. And we will do well to remember for our own sanity that we are divine children, but they are too. They are sons of Abraham. And as Jesus said, I came here to save the lost. So let's be found. Let us pray. For a moment, let us just feel ourselves. Feel what it is like to be who we are in this place, in this moment. And from this place, let us contemplate the thought, there is only one presence and one power in my life and in the universe. God the good, omnipotent. There is only one. So who does that make you? And who does that make your neighbor? And if that is so, perhaps that's the connection to our neighbor and to our divine that we have been longing for. Let us go home to that. And so it is. Amen. I hope you got something out of today's service. We intend to bring you things that will help you in your life become more of who you want to be, give you the freedom of forgiveness and the hope of expectancy that your life will unfold in a way that brings you joy, happiness, and is a contribution to the world. If you would like to contribute to this ministry, please go to unitytriangle.org, hit the donate button, and it will lead you into an easy way of doing that. We thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you again here.